A German sheepred ran to a hunter in the woods with a pleading look in its eyes. The hunter reluctantly followed. It led him to a large fire, but what worried him was a little girl, lying on the ground and motionless. Janet Bennett giggled as she darted across the yard, her small feet kicking up damp grass. At 6 years old, she was a blur of energy, her dark curls bouncing with every step. Beside her, Chico lumbered along, his silver-streaked fur catching the faint morning light. The old German shepherd's tongue lolled out, but his eyes stayed sharp, fixed on the little girl he'd sworn to protect. Once a canine partner to Janet's father, Chico was slower now, his joints stiff from years of service, yet he never let her out of his sight. "Catch me, Chico," Janet called, spinning around with her arms outstretched. She tripped over a root, tumbling into the soft earth with a laugh. Chico was there in an instant, nudging her with his wet nose, a low whine rumbling in his throat. She grabbed his ears playfully, pulling herself up. "You're too slow, old man." From the kitchen window, Clara watched them, her hands submerged in soapy water as she scrubbed a plate. The sight of her daughter and the dog stirred a bittersweet ache in her chest. 2 years had passed since her husband's death, 2 years of quiet mornings and empty nights in this little house on the hill. Chico had been his shadow back then, a fierce partner in the canine unit, sniffing out danger with unerring precision. Now he was their anchor, the last piece of him they could hold on to. Clara's lips curved into a sad smile, but her eyes lingered on the horizon, where the fog draped the forest like a shroud. "Mum, look!" Janet's voice broke her reverie. The girl waved a stick she'd found, tossing it toward the trees. Chico bounded after it, his limp barely noticeable in his eagerness. Clara waved back, but her gaze drifted to the sky. The air felt different today, dry and crisp after weeks of rain. A faint whiff of something sharp tickled her nose, like smoke from a distant fire, but she brushed it off. Probably just a neighbor burning leaves. Janet plopped down beside Chico, who'd returned with the stick clamped in his jaws. She scratched behind his ears, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You're the best, you know that? Daddy said you were his hero." Chico tilted his head as if he understood and rested his muzzle on her lap. They sat there, a pair of misfits bound by something deeper than words, a silent pact forged in loss and loyalty. Clara turned back to the sink, her hands trembling slightly as she set the plate down. She didn't hear Janet's next words, carried away by the breeze. "What's that smell, Chico?" The dog's ears twitched, his nose lifting to sniff the air, but he didn't move. Janet frowned, peering toward the woods. For a moment she thought she saw a shadow flicker between the trees. Too quick to be real, too strange to ignore. "Did you see that?" she asked, but Chico only pressed closer, his warmth steady against her side. The morning stretched on, peaceful and still, the kind of quiet that felt like a gift after so much rain. Clara finished the dishes, Janet hummed a tune, and Chico kept watch, his old bones settled into the grass. None of them noticed how the air grew heavier, how that faint, smoky scent sharpened into something real. They didn't know, not yet, that this calm was a fragile thing, a thin thread stretched tight before the snap. No one knew that this peaceful day would soon shatter. Janet tugged at the oversized yellow jacket draped over her shoulders, the sleeves flopping past her hands. "Come on, Chico, let's explore," she chirped, her voice bright with mischief. The old German shepherd lifted his head from the grass, his silver-flecked ears perking up. With a grunt, he hauled himself to his feet and trotted after her, his shadow stretching long in the late morning sun. She led him toward the old shed behind the house, a weathered wooden box stuffed with her dad's forgotten things. Rusted tools, a cracked leather jacket, a box of medals he'd never worn. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint tang of gasoline. Janet pushed the creaky door wider, her sneakers scuffing the dirt floor. "Look at all this stuff," she said, poking at a pile of old newspapers. Chico nosed around a corner, his tail wagging lazily. She didn't see the frayed wire dangling from the wall, its insulation peeled back like skin, or the tiny spark that flickered when her jacket brushed against it. A pop, sharp and sudden, crackled through the silence, and then a tongue of flame licked up the stack of papers. "Whoa!" Janet yelped, stumbling back as the fire caught fast, feeding on the dry wood and brittle pages. In seconds, the shed was a furnace, orange light dancing across the walls. Smoke poured out, black and choking, curling into her lungs. She coughed, her eyes stinging as she waved her arms. "Chico, we gotta go!" But the flames were greedy, racing up a shelf, swallowing a can of paint thinner with a hiss. A burst of heat shoved her backward, and she tripped, crashing into a corner as burning debris blocked the door. "Help!" she screamed, her voice cracking with panic. The smoke thickened, a heavy shroud that blurred everything. She curled into a ball, her jacket pulled over her face, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Chico, where are you?" Outside, Chico erupted into a frenzy of barks, deep and urgent, his paws clawing at the ground. He circled the shed, snout low, searching for a way in. The fire roared louder, spitting embers into the air, but he didn't hesitate. With a guttural growl, he charged through the doorway, plunging into the inferno. Flames licked at his fur, singeing the silver patches black, but his eyes locked onto Janet's small shape huddled in the haze. "There you are," she sobbed as he reached her, his teeth clamping onto the sleeve of her jacket. He yanked hard, dragging her across the floor, her legs kicking weakly against the heat. A beam groaned overhead, splintering under the fire's weight, and crashed down inches from them, pinning his back leg. Chico yelped, a sharp cry that cut through the chaos, but he didn't stop. With a desperate heave, he pulled her free of the corner, his burned fur smoking as he shoved her toward the exit. They burst out into the yard, Janet tumbling onto the grass, coughing and gasping. She went limp, her eyes fluttering shut as the smoke stole her breath. Chico staggered over her, his chest heaving, one leg dragging uselessly behind him. His fur was a patchwork of char and blood, his flanks trembling with exhaustion. He stood guard, a battered sentinel, scanning the empty yard. Clara wasn't back from the market. No one was coming. His ears flattened, and with a final glance at Janet's still form, he turned and limped toward the forest, disappearing into the trees. The shed blazed on, its black smoke spiraling into the sky. Janet lay motionless, her yellow jacket smeared with soot, while Chico's fading paw prints marked his path into the unknown. He was her only hope now, a fading spark racing against time. Ethan Cole trudged through the forest, his boots crunching over pine needles and broken twigs. The rifle slung over his shoulder swayed with each step, a familiar weight he carried more for habit than need. At 38, he was a man carved by solitude. Broad shoulders hunched under a faded flannel shirt, dark hair streaked with grey, and eyes that rarely met the world. 2 years ago, he'd lost his daughter, Lily, to a car accident, and with her went the last tether to a life he'd once known. Now, the woods were his refuge, a place where the silence drowned out the echoes of her laughter. He paused by a stream, kneeling to fill his canteen, when a faint sound pricked his ears, a weak, rasping bark. Ethan straightened, his brow furrowing. "What the hell?" he muttered, scanning the trees. The sound came again, closer now, and then a shape stumbled into view. It was a dog, an old German shepherd, its fur matted with soot and blood, one leg dragging behind it. The animal's eyes were wild, desperate, locked onto him like a lifeline. "Hey, easy there," Ethan said, holding up a hand as the dog limped closer. Its barks turned to whimpers and it pawed at the ground, circling him. Ethan squinted, noticing the burns blistering its coat, the raw pink skin beneath. "You're a mess, buddy. What happened to you?" The dog, Chico, though Ethan didn't know his name, nudged his leg, then turned and staggered back the way it came, glancing over its shoulder as if to say, "Follow me." Ethan hesitated. He wasn't in the business of chasing strays, and the forest was full of its own troubles, but something in those eyes, pleading, unyielding, stirred a memory he'd buried deep. Lily's face flashed before him, her small hand tugging his sleeve, begging him to come see a bird's nest she'd found. His chest tightened and he cursed under his breath. "Fine," he growled, slinging the rifle tighter, "but you better not be wasting my time." Chico led him through the underbrush, his pace faltering but relentless. Ethan followed, ducking branches and sidestepping roots, the dog's labored breathing guiding him like a beacon. The air grew heavy, tinged with a bitter edge he recognized too well. Smoke. As they crested a ridge, he saw it, a plume of black curling into the sky, rising from a clearing below. His stomach dropped. "Fire," he said, quickening his steps. They broke through the trees into a yard where a shed blazed like a bonfire, its walls buckling under the heat. and there, sprawled on the grass, was a little girl, her yellow jacket streaked with ash, her chest still. Ethan froze, his breath catching as the past slammed into him. Lily, pale and broken on a stretcher, her eyes closed forever. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "Not again." Chico collapsed beside the girl, a low whine escaping his throat as he nudged her limp hand. Ethan snapped out of it, dropping to his knees. "Hang on, kid," he said, his voice rough but steady. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck, feeling a faint pulse, then tilted her head back, checking her airway. She wasn't breathing. His hands moved fast, tearing off his jacket to cushion her head, his mind racing through the CPR he'd learned years ago. Come on, he muttered, starting chest compressions. The forest watched in silence, the crackle of the fire, a cruel counterpoint to Chico's ragged breaths. Ethan worked, sweat beating on his forehead, his world narrowing to the girl beneath his hands. Beside him, Chico lay splayed out, his burned body trembling, his eyes never leaving her face. Ethan's hands pressed down on Janet's chest, counting under his breath. 1, 2, 3. His palms sinking into her small frame with steady force. Sweat dripped from his brow, stinging his eyes, but he didn't stop. "Breathe, damn it," he growled, tilting her head back to blow air into her lungs. Her lips were cold, her face smudged with soot, but he kept going, each compression a plea against the silence. Beside him, Chico whimpered. His burned body sprawled on the grass, too weak to stand but close enough to brush Janet's arm with his nose. After what felt like hours, though it was only minutes, Janet's chest jerked. A ragged cough tore from her throat and she gasped, her eyes fluttering open. Ethan exhaled hard, slumping back on his heels. "That's it, kid. You're okay," he said, his voice shaky with relief. She blinked up at him, dazed, her tiny hand clutching at the air. "Chico?" she rasped, her voice barely a whisper. The dog lifted his head, a faint wag of his tail answering her call. The roar of the fire had dulled to a crackling hiss, but the air still hung heavy with smoke when Clara's scream cut through it. "Janet!" She stumbled into the yard, a grocery bag slipping from her arms, apples rolling across the dirt. Her eyes locked onto her daughter, then widened at the stranger kneeling beside her. "Oh my God, what happened?" she cried, dropping to her knees. She pulled Janet into her arms, rocking her, tears streaking her face. "Baby, I'm here. I'm here!" Ethan shifted back, catching his breath. She was in the shed. "Fire got out of hand," he said gruffly, nodding toward the smoldering ruin. Clara's gaze darted to Chico, his fur a mess of burns and blood, and her breath hitched. "You saved her," she whispered, reaching out to stroke his head. Chico's eyes met hers, weary but warm, and she broke down, burying her face in Janet's hair. Thank you, a neighbor's shout broke the moment. Old Mr. Hensley, drawn by the smoke and Clara's cries. "I called 911, he yelled, waving his phone as he hobbled over. Soon roared up the hill, sirens wailing in the distance. Ethan stood, brushing dirt off his hands, watching as Clara clung to Janet. The ambulance screeched to a stop, medics spilling out with gear in tow. They swarmed Janet first, slipping an oxygen mask over her face, checking her vitals. "She's stable, just smoke inhalation," one said, his tone clipped. "We'll get her to the hospital." Chico tried to follow, dragging himself after the stretcher, but his injured leg buckled. A medic knelt beside him, wrapping his wounds in gauze. "Tough old guy," the man muttered, shaking his head. Chico whined, refusing to leave Janet's side, and they let him hobble along, his eyes fixed on her. At the hospital, Janet lay in a white bed, her breathing steady, the mask fogging with each exhale. Chico curled up beside her, bandaged and sedated but alert, his head resting on her arm. Clara sat close, holding her hand, her face etched with exhaustion and gratitude. Ethan lingered in the hallway, peering through the glass door. The sight stirred something in him, a flicker of warmth cutting through the old ache. He turned away, hands in his pockets, unsure what to make of it. Janet's hospital room buzzed with quiet life over the next few days, the beep of monitors softening into a familiar hum. She sat propped up in bed, a coloring book spread across her lap, her small fingers clutching a crayon as she shaded a lopsided tree. Chico lay beside her, his bandaged legs stretched out awkwardly, his head nestled against her side, snoring faintly. Every so often she'd pause to run her hand through his patchy fur, whispering, "You're my best friend, you know." His tail thumped softly against the mattress, a steady rhythm that filled the sterile space with warmth. The burns on his coat were healing, though the silver was now streaked with scars, a map of his bravery etched into his skin. She traced one with her fingertip, her brow furrowing. "Does it hurt, Chico?" she asked. He opened one eye, licked her hand, and she giggled, the sound bright against the pale walls. Ethan became a regular shadow in the doorway, his visits starting with a knock and a sheepish grin that softened his rugged edges. He'd bring little gifts, a worn copy of The Secret Garden with dog-eared pages, a bag of gummy bears that Janet would share with him, one for her, one for him. He'd sit by her bed, listening to her chatter about the pictures she'd drawn. "This one's you," she said one afternoon, holding up a sketch of a stick figure with a rifle, a scruffy beard and a lumpy hat she'd added for flair. He chuckled. "Guess I clean up nicer in crayon," he said, ruffling her hair. She beamed, and for a moment he saw Lily in her smile, fierce, alive, unbroken. Clara watched from the corner. She'd started talking to Ethan too, their conversations stretching beyond polite thanks into something deeper. One evening, as Janet napped, Clara leaned against the wall and said, "I lost my husband 2 years ago. Feels like I've been holding my breath ever since, waiting for the next thing to go wrong." Ethan nodded, staring at his boots, the scuffed toes telling their own story. "Lost my girl Lily, same time, been running from it, hiding out there in the woods like it'd make the hurt smaller." The words hung between them, raw and unguarded, but instead of breaking, they built something. A fragile bridge of shared scars, tentative but real. Clara wiped her eyes, offering a small, shaky smile. "Maybe we've both been waiting for a reason to breathe again." When Janet was cleared to go home, the little house on the hill felt different, lighter somehow, despite the charred scar where the shed once stood. Ethan helped carry her bag, lingering as Clara set the table for dinner, her hands moving with a purpose she hadn't felt in months. The kitchen smelled of roasted chicken, fresh bread, and a hint of rosemary from a pot on the stove, a far cry from the smoke that had haunted it days before. The days turned to weeks, and Ethan's truck became a fixture in the driveway, its dented bumper a quiet testament to his presence. He'd fix a loose porch step, hammering nails with a focus that steadied his hands, or read to Janet while Clara cooked, his low voice stumbling over the whimsical parts of her favorite stories. The three of them, and Chico, fell into an easy rhythm, a patchwork family finding its shape. They stayed there, a makeshift family stitched together by a little girl's faith and a dog's unshakable heart, watching the light stretch across the forest until it faded into dusk, leaving only the sound of crickets and Chico's gentle snores.